Now we get to dive into one of the most iconic characters in the Warcraft universe. Some would say that his story brought the lore to its peak during the raid of Icecrown Citadel, but that specific time was near the end of his life. So let's go back a bit and cover the details of Arthas Menethil. If this is your first time visiting the channel, welcome. My name is Quaylen, and I'm in the middle of abridging the World of Warcraft Chronicle series. That means I'm taking the lore contained within these books and condensing it even more than it already is. I'm not diving into the deep details or the novels that have more information, just sticking to what's written in the books. So again, apart from what you read in the title of the video, I'll be sharing other bits of information. In essence, I'm telling the story in order as the books tell it. Currently, we're on Volume 3, but if you want to start from the beginning, then I suggest clicking the link in the tab up above or in the description down below. That will lead you to a video that contains all 10 episodes covering the lore in Volume 1. But if you're already caught up with the story, then let's continue our journey into the tales of Azeroth. Trapped within the Frozen Throne, the Lich King dreamed of one day turning the undead against the Legion, but knew the time wasn't right. While the plague took root in Lordaeron, he focused on finding a mighty, mortal champion to serve as his direct surrogate in the outside world, with the soul-consuming blade Frostmourne as the means to bind that servant to his will. The Dreadlords stood in the way of this plan, so the Lich King manipulated them by exploiting their fear of Killjaden's punishment. Through subtle and strategic persuasion, he made the demons believe that finding a new mortal champion and arming them with Frostmourne was their own idea. With the Dreadlord's approval secured, the Lich King broke Frostmourne free from his icy prison and sent it to the base of Icecrown Glacier, where it would wait for the right person to claim it. Only Kel'Thuzad knew the truth of his master's intentions, and he privately vowed to one day rebel against the Legion. The plague of undeath spread across Lordaeron, resisting conventional healing and holy magic alike. King Arthas Menethil II was slow to respond, dismissing early reports as routine sickness and prioritizing the lingering threat of the Orcish horde over investigating the disease. As deaths mounted, disturbing rumors spread of bodies vanishing and the dead rising as walking corpses. These reports were true. The plague's final stage was reanimating its victims as mindless walking corpses bound to the Lich King's will. Kel'Thuzad watched the unfolding devastation with cold satisfaction, reviewing it as the culmination of his sacrifices in service to the Lich King. He named the growing force of undead and fanatical cultists the Scourge, a name that would come to define all who served the Lich King as they set out to bring humanity to its knees. Medivh recognized that the plague was spreading too fast to stop, and that the true threat was the Legion's plan to harness the second will of eternity. He resolved to focus his efforts on protecting that fount of power, even if it meant leaving Lordaeron to its fate. His plan was to gather unaffected citizens and lead them west to Kalimdor. Disguising himself as a mysterious hooded prophet, he reached out to influential figures through dreams and personal visits, urging them to abandon the Eastern Kingdoms before the world fell to ruin. Never revealing his true identity, knowing his name carried the weight of a villain. Two of his most important targets, King Arthas Menethil II and Archmage Antonidas of Dalaran, both dismissed his warnings. Arthas was consumed with the ongoing threat of liberated orcs and wrote off the prophet as a madman, while Antonidas was focused on investigating the plague and sent his most promising student, Jaina Proudmoore, to study the outbreak firsthand. Having found little success with the humans, Medivh turned his attention to the orcs. The irony was not lost on him. The very creatures who had once invaded and nearly destroyed Azeroth might now be its best hope for salvation. The new horde under War Chief Thrall was without a homeland, living as nomads in Lordaeron while evading human military forces. Another war with the Alliance seemed inevitable, and Thrall had no answers for his people as nightmares of defeat and imprisonment haunted him. It was during this desperate time that Medivh appeared to Thrall, warning him of a coming demonic invasion that would destroy all civilizations. He urged Thrall to lead his people across the Great Sea to the land of Kalimdor as the only path to stopping the Burning Legion. Thrall was deeply unsettled by the encounter. Though too young to have lived through the Legion's enslavement of his people, the stories passed down by elder orcs made him fear what inaction might cost them. Still, hesitant to trust a stranger, he consulted the elemental spirits, who responded with urgency. Trust him. Thrall openly shared everything with his people, and despite their wariness of the unknown, they trusted their war chief. He rallied the new horde and set out to find a new way across the sea. King Tyrannus, no longer able to ignore the plague, dispatched his son Arthas Menethil to aid Jaina Proudmoore in investigating the disease. Though the two had ended their romantic relationship, they still carried feelings for each other. As their investigation deepened, Arthas and Jaina uncovered that the plague was being deliberately spread through grain shipments out of Anderhall. Worse still, the disease didn't just kill, it reanimated its victims as undead, and the two were forced to fight through waves of walking corpses firsthand. Behind it all was a human cult led by Kel'Thuzad, who commanded an undead army known as the Scourge. The revelation that humans were responsible for the plague's spread filled Arthas with rage. Driven by fury and a fierce desire for justice, Arthas set his sights on hunting down Kel'Thuzad and his followers. His chance would come in Anderhall. The Lich King had been watching Arthas through his Scourge minions and saw in him the perfect candidate for corruption, a charismatic, gifted fighter whose anger and desperation were steadily consuming him. He subtly steered the Dreadlords towards the same conclusion, and together they began plotting how to lure Arthas to Frostmourne in Northrend. Their plan hinged on Kel'Thuzad. He was to confront Arthas in battle, reveal that he served a higher power, that being the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis, hiding in the city of Stratholme, and then give his life in the process. Only Kel'Thuzad's death would drive Arthas to focus entirely on reaching Stratholme. Stratholme was chosen deliberately. It was the region's most populated and strategically vital city, as well as the birthplace of the Paladin Order. Its fall to the plague would be catastrophic, stripping Lordaeron of control over the Eastweld. The plan unfolded exactly as intended. Kel'Thuzad faced Arthas, delivered his message, and was cut down. Arthas, more desperate and unhinged than ever, immediately set his sights on Stratholme and Mal'Ganis. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that if you're enjoying this content, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you feel inclined to support the work that I'm doing, you can check out my membership options here on YouTube or on Patreon. I'm really grateful for all of those who have supported this massive project that I've been working on for quite some time now, and I do offer early access to all those people who have signed up. So if you're interested, check out the links down below, and let's get back to the story. As the quest wore on, Jaina grew increasingly alarmed by the change in Arthas. Consumed by hate, he pushed his companions to their limits and ignored her pleas for restraint, determined to save his people at any cost. Joining them en route to Stratholme was Uther the Lightbringer, a founding paladin of the Order of the Silver Hand and the man who had trained Arthas. Uther viewed the prince almost as a son and believed that, despite his stubbornness, Arthas would ultimately come to his senses. At Stratholme, Uther discovered how wrong he was. The city's citizens had already consumed tainted grain, and their transformation into undead was inevitable. Arthas saw only one solution: purge the entire city before its inhabitants turned, viewing it as both a mercy and a strategic necessity. Uther and his paladins refused outright, unwilling to slaughter innocents. Arthas branded their refusal as treason and turned his back on them. Jaina, too, could not bring herself to take part and departed alongside Uther. With only his loyalists remaining, Arthas swept through Stratholme. The city burned, and the screams of innocents filled the streets as the purge was carried out. In the midst of the carnage, Arthas confronted Mal'Ganis. Rather than fight, the Dreadlord issued a challenge: come to Northrend and face him in a true battle. Then, the demon quickly vanished. Arthas, convinced that killing Mal'Ganis would shatter the Scourge and end the plague, immediately set sail for Northrend. When Jaina and Uther returned to Stratholme days later, they found the city reduced to ash and littered with bodies. Jaina was racked with guilt, knowing she could have used her magic to stop Arthas, but had not. The two parted ways. Uther traveled to the capital to inform King Tyrannus of what his son had done, while Jaina returned to Dalaran to report to Antonidas about the plague. Neither of them knew that the next time they saw Arthas, the prince they had known and loved would be gone forever. The culling of Stratholme marked the point of no return for Arthas. His mind was unraveling and his heart had darkened, but one final step remained before he could become the Lich King's greatest servant. He needed to find Frostmourne. The Lich King couldn't lead Arthas directly to the blade without raising suspicion. Instead, he turned his attention to a group of dwarf explorers in Northrend led by Muradin Bronzebeard, a warrior who had once trained Arthas in combat and served as ambassador to Lordaeron. The Dreadlords, guided by the Lich King, secretly planted clues about Frostmourne in the dwarves' encampment, maps and ancient histories pointing to a legendary rune blade. The dwarves had no memory of where the information came from, and an intrigued Muradin set out to find the blade. When Arthas landed in Northrend's Howling Fjord, conditions were harsh, and the Scourge behaved unusually evasive rather than aggressive. The Lich King then used the Scourge to herd Muradin toward Arthas, engineering what appeared to be a chance encounter. Muradin told Arthas about Frostmourne, and the prince was immediately drawn to the idea of using it against Mal'Ganis. His hopes were soon crushed by a royal order from King Tyrannus commanding Arthas and his soldiers to return to Lordaeron. Knowing this might be his only chance at finding Mal'Ganis, Arthas secretly burned his own ships, trapping his forces in Northrend without their knowledge. With his soldiers stranded, Mal'Ganis unleashed a massive Scourge assault. Overwhelmed and desperate, Arthas saw only one option: find Frostmourne. Arthas and Muradin tracked the blade to a small cavern, where it hung suspended in a block of ice. Muradin sensed something deeply wrong and urged Arthas to leave it, but the prince was beyond reason. The Lich King shattered Frostmourne's icy prison with a burst of energy. The explosion sent jagged shards flying across the cavern, one of which struck Muradin and brought him down. Arthas rushed to heal his friend, and the holy light answered his call. All he had to do was embrace it. Instead, his thoughts turned to Frostmourne and its promise of power, convincing himself that holy magic had failed him too many times before. In that moment, Arthas turned his back on the light and seized Frostmourne. Its power surged through him, chilling his veins and consuming his soul. Through the blade, the Lich King could now speak directly into Arthas's mind, though for now, he allowed the prince to believe he was still in control. One final act remained before Arthas could take his place among the Scourge. Despite what Arthas believed, Muradin had not been killed by the Ice Shard, only knocked unconscious and robbed of his memories. He was discovered near death by a faction of dwarves called the Frostborn, who nursed him back to health. It would be many years before Muradin recovered his memories and returned to Ironforge. Arthas returned to his besieged camp wielding Frostmourne, cutting through the Scourge with devastating power as the Lich King urged him to feed the blade. His soldiers celebrated, unaware of the terrible price their prince had paid. Driven by the Lich King's whispers, Arthas believed that killing Mal'Ganis would save Lordaeron. He launched a relentless counterattack, pressing forward despite mounting human casualties until he finally found the Dreadlord. The Lich King saw this as his first step toward freedom, a chance to eliminate one of his most powerful Legion handlers. He commanded Arthas through Frostmourne, and the prince drove the blade into Mal'Ganis, vanquishing him. With the remaining Scourge scattered, the human survivors celebrated. Arthas did not join them. He wandered alone into the frozen wilderness, where the Lich King stripped away the last remnants of his humanity and filled his mind with dark, necromantic knowledge. When Arthas returned to camp days later, he was unrecognizable, pale skin, bone-white hair, and utterly transformed. The Prince of Lordaeron was gone, replaced by the first of a new kind of undead warrior, a Death Knight. Arthas slaughtered his own followers, with Frostmourne consuming their souls. Some rose as common Scourge minions, while others were reborn as Death Knights like their new master. With his forces gathered, Arthas rallied the Scourge and set course for Lordaeron. It was time to go home. The Lich King's Death Knights shared their name with undead soldiers from the Second War, but had different origins. Rather than fusing orc warlock spirits into human bodies as Gul'dan had done, these Death Knights were born from Arthas' own dark transformation. Mal'Ganis' death enraged the other Dreadlords, but the Lich King deflected blame by claiming Arthas had not yet been fully under his control. He promised it would not happen again, and the Dreadlords accepted his explanation. Unknown to both Arthas and the Lich King, Mal'Ganis had not truly perished. The Dreadlords had shielded themselves from Frostmourne's power when they crafted it, so rather than consuming his soul, the blade had cast it back into the twisting nether. In time, Mal'Ganis would be reborn. With no fleet of their own, Thrall and the new Horde stole Alliance ships from the port of South Shore under cover of night. Unlike the old Horde, they avoided unnecessary bloodshed. The threat drew the attention of Grand Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, who vowed to hunt them down. Proudmoore's navy quickly closed in on the Horde fleet, but a massive storm intervened, scattering both sides across the sea. Thrall took refuge on a nearby chain of islands, where he discovered that a large portion of his fleet, including Grommash Hellscream and his Warsong orcs, had gone missing in the Tempest. The surviving ships were badly damaged and in need of repair. On the islands, the Horde faced threats on multiple fronts. Remnants of Proudmoore's fleet had landed on the shores, and beneath the islands lurked a Naga sorceress named Zarjira, who commanded an army of Murlocs. In the midst of these dangers, Thrall forged an unexpected alliance with the Darkspear Trolls, a tribe that had fled persecution within the Girabashi Empire and settled on the islands. Thrall recognized in them a spirit similar to his own people, survivors of oppression seeking a place in the world. The Horde and the Darkspears fought together against both the humans and Zarjira's forces and prevailed, though at great cost. Among the fallen was Sen'jin, the wise and elderly chieftain of the Darkspear Trolls. In Sen'jin's honor, Thrall welcomed the Darkspears into the Horde. The Trolls accepted, seeing little future remaining on their war-torn island home. With their ships repaired, the Orcs continued west across the Great Sea, joined by many Darkspear Trolls. Leadership of the tribe passed to Sen'jin's son, Vol'jin. who gathered his remaining people and supplies and set out after the horde, hoping to find peace in the distant lands of Kalimdor. As Arthas sailed home, the Lich King ordered the Scourge to retreat from the Eastweld, leading the citizens of Lordaeron to believe their prince had defeated the undead in Northrend. This was by design. A welcoming populace would open the gates of the capital without suspicion. Arthas arrived with a massive hidden army of undead soldiers, death knights, necromancers, abominations, crypt fiends, gargoyles, and frostworms. He kept them concealed and entered the capital with only a small cloaked escort, allowing the celebrating crowds to usher him straight to the throne room. There, Arthas reunited with his father King Tyrannus and killed him, feeding his soul to Frostmourne. Before the city could react, Arthas and his Death Knights stormed through the streets while the Scourge emerged from hiding across all of Lordaeron. The Third War had begun. The other Alliance nations scrambled to respond, sending magi, dwarves, gnomes, soldiers, and even high elf priests to fight the undead. Nothing was enough. The Scourge operated as a coordinated, multi-layered force, each unit serving a specific and devastating purpose under the Lich King's command. Arthas and his Death Knights were the most dangerous weapons of all, combining physical combat mastery with necromantic power. A single Death Knight could shift the tide of an entire battle. Arthas leveraged his intimate knowledge of Lordaeron's terrain and the Alliance's tactics to dismantle resistance systematically. One by one, the kingdom's defenses crumbled. Lordaeron fell to the Scourge, with only scattered pockets of resistance remaining. While the other Alliance races fought in Lordaeron, the gnomes sent weapons and war machines but few soldiers, puzzling their allies and drawing questions about their loyalty. What the Alliance didn't know was that Gnomeregan was under siege by brutish creatures called trogs. The trogs had slumbered for thousands of years in the ancient fortress of Oldamon until dwarven explorers accidentally awakened them. Rather than following the dwarves to the surface, the trogs tunneled underground and were drawn toward Gnomeregan by the sounds of its machinery. When the trogs breached the lowest levels of Gnomeregan, they met no resistance. Though physically no match for the larger creatures, the gnomes were far superior in intellect, and their leader, High Tinker Geblin Mechatork, approached the invasion with calm and calculated precision. Mechatork positioned soldiers and war machines at choke points to hold the trogs back, but the creatures kept burrowing around the defenses. With too small an army to repel the invasion, he briefly considered calling on the Alliance for help, but ultimately decided against it, not wanting to divert resources from the fight against the Scourge in Lordaeron. He kept the entire crisis secret from his allies. It would be years before the rest of the world learned what had happened in Gnomeregan and the full extent of the sacrifices the gnomes had made in the name of the Alliance.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing, please check out my YouTube, Patreon, or Twitch memberships. And a big shout out to all the names on the screen here. You mean so much to me. Thank you so much for your help. And with that, I'll see you guys next time on the Tales of Azeroth.